Greetings, everyone. Welcome to another episode of UJ Sport on UJTV. My name is Collen, the communications coordinator at UJ Sport. Today, we're going to be talking to a couple of people in the university about gender-based violence in an academic and a sport environment such as the University of Johannesburg. You might have heard about the word gender-based violence. You might have also heard about domestic violence. You might have heard about harassment in the workplace. You might have heard about other cases of athletes who might have been abused by their coaches or people that are in positions of authority where they work as athletes or students. So today in studio we have a gender-based activist, Professor Corne Davis, who is also an associate professor in the School of Communication. We've got Jacqueline Toit, who is a manager for sports psychology and academic advising within the UJ Sport Division, and also Mr. Tebello Malatsi, who is an investigating officer at UJ Protection Services. We're going to look into gender-based violence from those three perspectives. Prof, welcome. Welcome, Jackie. Welcome, Mr. Tebello. Let's start maybe with the first look at gender-based violence, especially in an environment like ours. What is gender-based violence? And in an academic context like UJ, how do we know that this form of treatment is gender-based violence?
Okay, so gender-based violence is a broad term that refers to many kinds. You were referring to domestic violence. That is one kind of gender-based violence. It is any act of violence which is verbal, emotional, psychological, sexual, physical, any kind of abuse like that perpetrated against a person because of their gender. That is gender-based violence. So the context, the most prevalent form of gender-based violence is intimate partner violence. So that tells you that it's not committed by strangers. It's a person that is in an intimate relationship. So it can be a marriage, it can be a boyfriend, girlfriend, but that's your most common, your most prevalent form. Domestic violence is very common in South Africa, which means it's violence perpetrated in the home where children are normally exposed to the violence that occurs. So it's not necessarily between the intimate partner, solely it's in the home where the violence is perpetrated. So those are your most common forms, your domestic violence and your intimate partner violence. Students at university are exposed to other kinds of gender-based violence. For example, rape by strangers would also be classified as gender-based violence. Or, for example, blessers that students get exposed to. We all know what blessers are. They are people who pay for students' fees in exchange for sexual favors, typically, in a nutshell. So they're exposed to that. Then you have other factors at universities, for example, sex for marks and marks for sex that occur at universities that students can be exposed to. And then in your sports environment, we do have situations where coaches exploit their positions and sexual abuse occurs. So that gives you a kind of a broad overview. There are some others which we won't go into, but that's your general kinds of gender-based violence that students encounter.
Actually, that answered the question that I wanted to ask subsequent to the introduction, that, we know a lot of different kinds of gender-based violence. And I wanted to ask you, what would be the common cases of gender-based violence in a university setup like ours?
You do get sexual harassment. You also get peer-to-peer. Remember, in a university context, you get students actually inflicting violence on other students, particularly in intimate relationships. You know, where, for example, students would experience stalking, being followed and pursued, or people who don't want to terminate relationships and then become harassing the other person. That's common for students to experience. In an environment such as where students experience pressure, like performance-based, in such situations, you often get substance abuse. And with substance abuse also comes violent behavior, which can be peer-to-peer, or it can be a male-female kind of harassment, sexual harassment, and students often experience that in this kind of environments.
So, Jackie, I mean, you deal with a lot of students in your environment, given your portfolio. What kind of gender-based violence topics have you had to deal with in the past? Maybe some cases, if there were any?
I think just to add on to what Prof Davis said, so substance abuse I think plays a very big role because of the pressure that is on a sports student to perform. There might be instances where they might overindulge in alcohol, and I think that leads to you lowering your inhibitions, and I think that is where it happens. So it might be something like partner to partner violence, but it also in terms of the coaches. So if we go back to discrimination, so what you will see, some coaches come from a background where they were, for example, shouted at or humiliated in front of the team because that is how they are used to that, and then they bring this the same type of behavior to the current team. So that is also then that type of violence that happens within a team structure. So that's what we usually see.
Mr. Tebello, I'm sure you deal with the cases. You investigate some of these cases when they are brought forward to the UJ Protection Services. Can you just share with us some examples of some of the cases you've had to deal with, maybe in the recent past?
Okay, in the recent past, we dealt with the sexual harassment itself and rapes. But even though we dealt with them, we most of the time make awarenesses with the police. We are working with conjunction with the police, where we make awarenesses. I know we did few awarenesses in campuses regarding gender-based violence. But I will be proud to say this year we only experienced what was reported to us, only 3 cases, and one is handled by the police and one was withdrawn by the complainant herself. But the challenges we get with gender-based violence that some of the time you'll find that the victim is not aware that she's just been harassed or he's just been harassed. Now those are the awarenesses we also bring to the attention of the students, even to teach them further on their rights as the victims of gender-based violence. We do take those cases very seriously. We don't want to delay on cases like that. And some of the cases, based on circumstances, they have been taken to student affairs. Some have been taken based on the victim's request to the police, whereby we'll escort the student to the police station to open a case. But some you'll find that the student maybe is an ex-boyfriend or something, then she just or he just want us to give a warning to that person. And we really don't, it doesn't matter who reports gender-based violence, whether it's a male or a female, we take it serious. Whether the suspect is a female or male, we treat it the same, I'm sorry.
So, Jackie, I'm going to come back to you. We know that sports plays a role, a very big role, in shaping the character of an individual, and subsequently that affects, obviously, society in which people live. In your own experiences, because you've been in this role for quite some time now, what kind of, what role do you think sports plays in shaping people to become better individuals in a university setup like ours when it comes to gender-based violence?
So I think the role that sport can play, it's a very good base where you can actually start sharing information. So we recently had a GBV activation or awareness activation campaign where we just started to talk, and some of what the student mentioned is that they want someone to listen. They just want to talk about these topics. I think within your team it is a safe environment for them to talk about things, but we also need to initiate that. So I think that's what sport creates, that basis for them to talk, for people to listen. But also we, maybe as adults, we need to have more educational sessions so that they know what GBV is, what are the types, what are the reporting structures, what is something that you do with the coaches is safeguarding. I know SASCOC also enforces that everyone that has to go to the Olympics have to go through that training. What is, you can't have a student or an athlete alone in your room. There always has to be somebody else just to make sure that there is no opportunity for something to happen. So I think because of that intimate relationship, once again, between a coach and an athlete, that awareness and education from both parties is really important. But in a broader context, if you think of sport events, like we now currently having varsity football that's starting on Thursday, for us once again to launch a GBV campaign where lots of people can see this on TV, that this is what we stand for, this is the support structures, that is what sport offers. And because it is a place where people can share, so it creates that platform where people can start talking.
What kind of programs does UJ have in place to make sure that gender-based violence doesn't happen within the sporting environment here?
Okay, so we're trying to partner a lot, and I think that is what makes University of Johannesburg different. We try to really not work in silos. So we at UJ Sport are going to partner with PsyCAD because they already have a victims of abuse support group that happens every second week, where it can be historical, it can be current. They also have groups where they talk about relationships, so what is a good relationship, what is not, and that also is something that came from our needs analysis with our students, that the definition of a healthy relationship is something that seems to be very vague. So to partner with that, because the need is they want to talk and they want people to listen, but also then once again to use that platform or that stage where we have a lot of people at an event like the varsity football, just to say this is what we stand for, and then we start the conversations from there. We also, with our transformation unit at University of Johannesburg, they've launched the online Blackboard module, where staff and students can access that. So we are putting all the UJ Sport athletes through that because we want them to be aware. And as I said, we are also working on a safeguarding part for our staff at UJ Sport. So I think that is the campaigns. And they've also partnered with Prof Davis to help us with our launch, our awareness campaign, and also to look at maybe educating the staff as well.
So, Prof, as somebody that has been working with, you're an activist who deals with a lot of things that have to do with gender-based violence, fighting gender-based violence within a university like ours. What kind of support should be given to people who maybe could have been on the wrong side? And I'm asking this because, if somebody commits a crime or finds themselves on the wrong side of the law, sometimes we don't want that. We don't want to lose that person. We don't want that person to, we cannot say you were a perpetrator for a certain incident, and therefore, you're not going to continue being like that. So we have to rehabilitate such people. What kind of support do you think the university can give to such people?
Very, very good question. I did a study, we published it last year, where we did an employee perception survey to ask people, what kind of support would they need, for example, in the workplace? And what do they expect the employers to do, and how do we address gender-based violence? And a very strong theme that came out was perpetrator support. Now, we've just got to look at the real picture in South Africa. South Africa's intimate partner violence statistic is 6 times higher than the global average, right? So the chances are that the average child would have been exposed to some kind of gender-based violence in their lifetime, either as a child rape victim, which is very common in South Africa, sadly, or as a witness in domestic violence or a victim within a context, or witnessing intimate partner violence. That cannot not affect the person. It will affect the person's development of their minds, development of their confidence. In some aspect, that is going to affect them. So perpetrators, in many cases, have experienced some kind of gender-based violence in their lifetime, because you're not born a gender-based violence perpetrator. It's a societal thing. People become socialized into it. It's peer influences, it's experiences that make people become perpetrators. And perpetrators often do require help. But if you think victims don't seek help, because 93% of cases of GBV are never reported, so there's no support for victims. But perpetrators don't know where to reach out and say, I have this behavior, I observed this in myself, and I need to change. So by educating first, explaining what gender-based violence is, and to teach people to self-observe, they can recognize in themselves and say, I need help. Start there and make it possible for them to find somewhere, be it PsyCAD, be it any other service, to say, I need help. This is my behavior. I need help, so that they can also be rehabilitated.
I know gender-based violence, it's such a sensitive topic to talk about, but I'm sure there should be some success stories from some of the incidents that may have occurred in the past, reported, investigated, and dealt with or resolved. I just wanted to hear, maybe, have you had any people that came forth, or that you saw that this person became rehabilitated after a certain incident has been investigated and interrogated and then resolved. What would be some of the success stories that you can share with us that you have experienced in the past?
Your success stories normally come from activists. Because the topic is so stigmatized, people are reluctant to come forward and tell their stories. We did have a person in industry who was well known, who unfortunately committed suicide, and I'm not going to discuss that. But there are people who are willing to tell their stories, and this is especially what we need with men who have said, I've come from an abusive background, this is how I grew up, I learned that behavior, but I sought help, I transformed, and I changed. And I now know that violence is not an option for me, that there are other ways to deal with anger. And that anger is a consequence of these kind of emotions. I've addressed these emotions, and this is now how I deal with matters when I experience that. That is the kind of stories you want to hear. But because of our stigmatization of gender-based violence, people are still reluctant to tell their stories because of the fear of judgment, you know. But there are such stories. We just have to encourage them to tell them.
So maybe Jackie, as a follow-up question to that is, what are some of the stereotypes or the gender-based violence stereotypes or gender roles that perpetuate gender-based violence? I know that, a university is a melting pot of different kinds of people from all walks of life. People come here in their first years, coming from the rural areas, others in the urban areas, others from, all sorts of places. When they get here, they probably come with a certain learned behavior from home. Our psychology is different. The way I look at a woman and the way he looks at a woman is probably two, different things. I just wanted to find out what is the impact of gender role stereotypes that perpetuate gender-based violence?
I think in sport, maybe it might be, and Prof, maybe you can help me out of the correct term here, because they're seen as these sports stars, I think that they're the be-all and the end-all.
So you talk about toxic masculinity.
Yes. So I play for the first team. I'm on TV every Monday or every Thursday. So if I say this, then that's how it is. And because of what you will see, this people's need to be accepted, the boys will just fall for whatever they say because they're seen as these superstars. So I think a lot with what Prof said about that awareness, maybe that links to GBV as becoming aware of yourself and what is right and what is wrong. So what I think that is maybe one of the biggest gender roles that we see, and in both sides, is that they are seen as these performance, almost these gods, and people just fall for that all the time.
Yes,
but there's actually an ideal opportunity to instill leadership. Because they are heroes or seen as heroes by sports fans, they are the exact people we want to support, to assist, to shape in terms of leadership, because they have people looking up to them. So our sports, especially the men in sport, have the ideal opportunity to demonstrate what real men are like, what real men do and what they don't do, because there's not enough of that. In South Africa, we were just talking on the show with Prof Corne on Wednesday about the leadership, political leadership that doesn't exist, that people become obsessed with their power and abuse it, and that we have corruption in this country and all of these things. And that's why there's a need for real leaders. And this sports fraternity is the ideal place to cultivate such leadership. And that is why we should pay more attention to our sports heroes at UJ and cultivate that leadership, that they can demonstrate what real men are like.
Yeah. Mr. Tebello?
I think I'll get back a little on the question of rehabilitating the perpetrators of gender-based violence. And we have to put it clear to our audience that universities have zero tolerance to perpetrators of GBV. Now that gives us a challenge to maybe revisit the perpetrators, because usually in the gender-based violence, if the case is strong enough, that the perpetrator will be expelled from the university. Now, we will maybe advise that perpetrator to go further for counseling to other departments. But whenever the case is reported, immediately we do refer them to a psychiatrist for counseling and other.
Both the perpetrator
we do,
and
yes, we do. But now, here's a challenge again with the gender-based violence. Some of the victims of gender-based violence, or the so-called playing victims of gender-based, mess the system also by taking advantage of the systems that we have and try to maybe, if I may call it, steal money or extract money from the so-called perpetrators by threatening them with opening of cases while there was a consent, maybe of a sex of that kind of behavior. That is another challenge that we have. Now that also takes the investigation back, because sometimes when, I can just imagine when there's a rape, everyone in each department, the activists, they give attention to that. What did the protection services do? How far is the case and stuff like that? But you find that when we interview, we interact with a victim, you realize that there are things that doesn't make sense. But though we will take a report to student affairs and find that most of the time they don't even prosecute those cases. You advise the perpetrator, the victim, to go to SAPS, or we suggest we should call the SAPS. Then they don't want to participate in that investigation, but yet they still threaten the suspect that if I want, I'll go on with the case, give me this much or whatever.
So that speaks to the issue of wrongly accused people.
Yes.
How do we deal with that? If somebody comes forth and reports a rape that didn't exist, or maybe there was consent to have a sexual affair, and then it happens that the person can't win in extorting money from the next the person that's being accused. How do we deal with such?
You will always find that also happens. We've got to understand the concept that it's not that men are bad and women are all good. Not all women are good, not all men are bad. There are people who will use that kind of behavior. Say, for example, it's a girl who's obsessed with, say, one of these wonderful sports and wants to have a relationship but gets rebuffed. Now, out of spite, goes and lays charges for something that didn't happen because of emotional rejection. Those things do happen. That is why investigations have to be thorough. It's got to be evidence-based. Typically, if you want to lay rape charges, you would have had to have a rape kit done at a medical facility, for example. Although that's not always the case, people can report rape cases much later, but it's always going to depend on a thorough investigation, and it's possible, and that is why students need to be aware of this as well. So that if there's any notion or any feeling that some person may act maliciously or to tarnish their reputation, they must pay attention, keep notes, make records to anticipate that such things are possible if you are a sports celebrity.
Is there recourse on that?
Yeah, on that, if I may get in, Prof. If it's a criminal case, especially, internally we don't have a recourse for that. But I think last week we had a meeting where we were talking to student affairs that we should be referring to the law to maybe pursue the victims that were lying, maybe. But criminally, you will be charged. Usually, you will be charged for perjury, and you might face 5 years plus for lying that someone raped you and didn't. But those cases also are very seldom happening. But it depends on what you know and how you're going to push your case. Especially, you can just imagine how it's going to tarnish your reputation for something that you didn't even do. But criminally, you can be charged for perjury.
So, Jackie, I'm going to shoot this one to you. Do you think that there's a lack of awareness and reporting mechanisms for gender-based violence in institutions?
I wouldn't say, when we started the conversation, you said it is a very prevalent topic. Everybody's talking about gender-based violence. I really think it's about the education. So it is all out there, but people don't really understand what it's about. They don't understand how reporting mechanisms work. So what happens if maybe it was a false false accusation? Do I still have a say? Will somebody protect me? So I think it's more about the education, especially in terms of the reporting, because people watch a lot of TV, so they see this is what's supposed to happen. But do students actually know? So if this happens, this is where I can get a rape kit done. It is important to do that, because how are they going to prosecute that if there's no other evidence? So I think it's about the education more than the awareness.
Yeah. How many cases do you get in a year for related to GBV?
I won't be lying to you. We don't get much of gender-based violence cases. Like to date, we have only 3 since January to date. We have only 3, 2 sexual harassment and rape. But remember, there are those cases that will be reported to transformation, which we might not get the data of. Only when we report to the senior management, we see that there's a difference. There might be more. But again, I must bring it to the attention of the students that most of the students are afraid to open cases because they have a feeling that in the protection services, maybe they don't get protected enough. But I will gladly say that we have 4 investigators at the moment, which is me as a manager, and we have 3 investigators. And 2 of those investigators are females. Now, we do give a opportunity for the victim to choose who she wants to deal with. If she wants to deal, especially when we go to LGBTQI APK plus students, we do make them choose who they want to deal with. If one male is not there, I'm there as a manager, I can just chip in and help on those cases. We do take their rights very important, because we don't want to secondary victimize them. But again, unfortunately, with investigation, we are sometimes a little brutal with questions, trying to run away from people who might be committing perjury, and even protecting our students, because sometimes they don't know that we can't call the police where we already feel that, yeah, there's perjury, possible perjury. We'll rather advise you that you still want to continue with this case, even though 1, 2, 3, 4 has got a question. Is questionable, you know. Yeah.
So, Jackie, we've got, a university is an environment where you would say, students enter as first years, and then they become senior students in second year, third year, and then honors. Some of them, by the time some of them get to masters, many of the students who came through as first years would have completed their studies and gone out of the system. What do we have, say, for instance, during orientation at the beginning of each year, to make sure that we inculcate a culture of people that know their responsibility within the university, to say, if you come from a high school environment, you enter a university like ours, what are some of the initiatives or programs that we take through these students to make sure that when they are here, we don't have to deal with cases of GBV, for instance?
So I think we have a global thing that we try to do. We have our own separate first year induction with the sports students, where we tell them this is the services. If you have, for example, academic query, this is what you need to look at. If this is your type of queries, I think that is just for them to know what the structures are, and then what we then have as follow-ups are typical workshops that look at life skills. But something that I think is a new initiative for us this year is to really then bring in GBV as part of those topics that we look at, or a workshop, and for them to have these safe spaces where they can converse and talk about the topic. But I do believe in normal first year induction, psyched is part of the presentation, so they are aware once again of the support structures. But I think so that is what we aim to do.
Yeah. Prof, from an academic perspective, what should universities be doing to make sure that students are informed and educated about how to interact with other students, how they can live, peacefully within residences and sports environments and other spaces within the university, to make sure that people know that this kind of behavior is it cannot be tolerated, and should they find themselves in such predicaments, and this is what they need to do to deal with such cases. From an academic perspective, what should universities be doing to make sure that they deal with the issue of GBV?
You see, the systems are being put in place now for support. We have created a brochure that we shared with identifying the kinds of gender-based violence, explaining what students are vulnerable to, and listing all the support facilities available. That kind of information has to be shared by all academics in all faculties. It should be on everybody's Blackboard page, ULink page. There should be a section that covers, there's the information accessible. It's very simple to upload a document. Activists like myself, I always speak to my students directly about the topic, saying I'm an activist, and using every speaking opportunity that we have to share the information. It's all accessible and available. We just need to make sure that all academics and all stakeholders across university share that information with our students.
Sorry, Colin, just to link on to what Prof said, I think as adults or as responsible citizens, we should also not shy away from the topic. We should talk about it. We should talk about to your children or to family members about relationships, about reporting structures. What do we have? Because I think for too long, people have been staying, they kept quiet because it's such a sensitive topic. So I think it also starts with you as an individual. Get yourself upskilled, know about it, and then just start talking in normal conversations.
As we conclude our conversation, Mr. Tebello, how should students report gender-based violence cases to protection services?
Okay, the students can report the gender-based violence cases to protection services per campus. At APK, they will report it to 011 559 2555 or 3400. At APB, they will report it to 011 559 1312 or 1076. At DFC, they will report it to 011 559 6085. And then at Soweto campus, they will report it to 011 559 5555. I think that's all the numbers. Then we have also a psychiat 24-hour call, which is 082 059 1137. I'll repeat that again, 082 054 1137. And then transformation, also during working hours, only on transformation, it will be 011 559 4311. 011 559 4311. And just to add on that is that in the near future, but I think the whole campus community will be informed, all cases of gender-based violence will be investigated by transformation. However, for now, they are investigated by both transformation and protection services. And the other thing is that the platform to report them is the same. You reported protection services, then they will escalate it to transformation. Now and in future, it will be escalated to the relevant department. Thank you.
Prof, in closing, what would you say to the UJ community in terms of dealing with gender-based violence cases, raising awareness and making sure that the university is a violent-free institution?
I would encourage everybody to become educated, to know exactly what gender-based violence is and to address it head on, not to keep it a stigmatized topic that nobody wants to talk about, and that equal support needs to be provided to victims and perpetrators, that we can help our country heal. Perpetrators weren't born, they were socialized. And if we're not part of the solution, we're part of the problem.
Thank you so much. Jackie, any parting words?
I just want to echo what Prof said, and I think this is something we are really trying with the students at UJ Sports as well, is you need to take accountability for things that happen. It all starts with you. So I think that is, in closing, I think that is where we're going to start.
All right. If you have been listening on to this conversation, perhaps you know some stories of gender-based violence that could have happened here in the university or externally. Please share your thoughts with us. How do we deal with the scourge of gender-based violence here at the University of Johannesburg? If you would like to report any gender-based violence case or incident, please call the UJ Crisis Line on 082 054 1137. Or you could report any incident to the UJ Protection Services offices. They are available 24 hours a day. It's been lovely talking to this panel here. And I hope that the conversation will change your minds, will give you a little bit of insights into how the university deals with gender-based violence. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.
My name is Penelope Mutweni, and I am a Gender Equity Manager within the Transformation Unit at the University of Johannesburg. Communities without gender-based violence do not exist. As practitioners and experts, we want to work toward a time where we're able to cultivate communities that are free from violence and gender-based violence. GBV is an expression of a lot of social ills within our communities. It expresses a lack of respect from one individual to another. It expresses a lack of communication. It expresses the very fact that one individual does not recognize that another deserves respect or is worthy of dignity. In South Africa alone, 4 women are killed in our communities every single day by their partners. Normally, these deaths come as a result of wanting to end romantic relationships or other instances. At the University of Johannesburg, we have taken a zero tolerance to gender-based violence. The University of Johannesburg has created a platform of support that allows for students and staff to report any GBV cases or violations that they may encounter. This can be reported through the GBV online reporting tool that can be found on U-Link. Students and staff are urged to report any kind of violation, whether they've experienced it themselves or have been a witness of these kind of violations. This will allow for the university to deal with these reported cases timeously and allow for the alleged perpetrators to be excluded or taken out of the university so that we work towards cultivating a healthier university community at the end of the day.
The University of Johannesburg, the future reimagined.